దూర విద్యా విధానంలో డాక్టర్ బిఆర్ అంబేద్కర్ ఓపెన్ యూనివర్సిటీ దేశంలోనే మొట్టమొదటి సార్వత్రిక విశ్వవిద్యాలయం. దాదాపు 2.5 దశాబ్దాలుగా దూర విద్యా విధానం ద్వారా కంప్యూటర్ కోర్సును అనుసంధానం చేస్తూ BA, BCom, BSc డిగ్రీ కోర్సులను అందిస్తోంది. పోస్ట్ గ్రాడ్యుయేషన్ స్థాయి, డిగ్రీ, డిప్లొమా స్థాయి కోర్సులను ఔత్సాహికులైన విద్యార్థులకు అందిస్తోంది. డెవలప్మెంట్ స్టడీస్లో సెంటర్ ఫర్ ఎకనామిక్స్ అండ్ సోషల్ స్టడీస్ ద్వారా ఎంఫిల్, PhDతో పాటు విశ్వవిద్యాలయమే స్వయంగా దూర విద్యా విధాన అంశంపైన PhD వంటి పరిశోధనా కోర్సులు ప్రవేశపెట్టింది. సుమారు 4.5 లక్షల మంది విద్యార్థులు ఈ విశ్వవిద్యాలయం నుంచి ఉన్నత విద్యావకాశాలు పొందుతున్నారు. డాక్టర్ బిఆర్ అంబేద్కర్ సార్వత్రిక విశ్వవిద్యాలయం స్థానికంగా స్వయం బోధనా పద్ధతిలో ముద్రణ రూపంలో రూపొందించిన కోర్స్ మెటీరియల్ అందిస్తోంది. కోర్స్ మెటీరియల్ అధ్యయనానికి సహకరించే విధంగా రేడియో, టెలివిజన్ పాఠ్యాంశాల ఆధారంగా కార్యక్రమాలు ప్రసారం చేస్తోంది. అధ్యయన కేంద్రాల ద్వారా ఏర్పాటు చేసే సలహా సంసర్గ తరగతులు, సైన్స్ ప్రాక్టికల్ సౌకర్యాలు విద్యార్థులకు స్వయం అధ్యయనానికి ఒక చక్కటి అవకాశం. ఇవి విద్యార్థి సమీపంలో ఉండే అధ్యయన కేంద్రం నుంచే పొందొచ్చు.
Good afternoon, viewers. Welcome to the teleconference program of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar Open University. This teleconference is intended for the Master of Library and Information Science students of the university, and the duration of this program is 60 minutes. In the first half of the program, the experts will give you an overview of the topic, and in the next half, students are encouraged to interact with our experts to clarify their doubts. To get in touch with our experts, you can call on the following numbers: 040 2703 1431, 040 2703 1432, 040 2703 1433. The topic of today's teleconference program is digital rights management and its implication for library and information centers. The advent of computers and internet, they have facilitated easy access, search and retrieval of information. On the other hand, these technologies, they also have facilitated copying information without taking permission from the content owners and publishers. If we look into the history of copying, we see that in the ancient times, monks used to spend their lifetime sitting in the libraries copying from the already pre-existing religious scriptures, and they used to add some explanations, commentaries to make the work more valuable. In those days, producing a book by an author, it was a very difficult task. Only the rich people, the noble and the church could take up such tasks or assignment. The invention of printing has brought great opportunities to the authors. Instead of taking help from the rich and noble, authors, they have struck deals with the printers and publishers to produce multiple copies of their works and then to sell them in the market. Thus, both the authors and the publishers, they reap the benefits and also the financial rewards. And slowly, gradually, the printing has expanded, and even a common man could afford to buy a book and access a book through the libraries. Then even then, the cost of production was much higher, and the authors felt the need to protect the rights on their intellectual property. Thus came into existence the copyright law, and anybody who violates the law, it is seen as an offense. even though we had very sophisticated printing technologies, still copying was a cumbersome and difficult task, because if you want to take the entire Xerox of an entire book or a part of the book, then you need to spend on the paper, you need to spend considerable time in bundling the information, then binding and so on and so forth. At the end of all this process, you will be ending up spending lot of time and cost, which more or less is the same as the cost of the book. Then, but in the 21st century, copying has become very easy. With the invention of new devices like cameras, pen drives, we have personal computers, and then digital scanners, we have digital printers, laser printers. So, the copying has really become very easy, and more and more users started using copy paste options, and copying has increased. And this was harmful to the content creators who invested lot of money in producing a work. So, thus came into being the digital rights technologies which protect the access to the work itself. So, these technologies we call them as digital rights technologies. So, to discuss this topic in more detail, we have with us in the studios two experts, Dr. P. Divakar. He is a former librarian from the Premier Institute CCMB Hyderabad, and we have another expert, Dr. S. Venkateshan. He is the Director IT and Learning Resource Center, Indian School of Business, Hyderabad. I welcome you, sir, to the discussion. And to initiate the discussion, I would like to ask Dr. Divakar to explain the concept, actually what exactly DRM is. Sir, please explain this to our students.
Yeah. For several centuries, libraries have been holding collections in print format. Basically, we do three operations with the print content. We collect material, we organize the material, and we also do some kind of dissemination by way of several services. Now, as you have rightly said, thanks to internet, thanks to the information technology revolution, now the content which used to be in print form hitherto has now become available in an electronic or digital format. Now, this scenario has totally changed the way we operate. All these three operations like collection, organization and dissemination, all these three facets, there is tremendous implication with the technology. So, basically what we used to do is we used to collect the content and then for organization, we used to do some kind of a cataloging. In case of in the digital world, we call it metadata creation, so that the content becomes more accessible to the users. So, that part of job still remains in libraries, even in the digital environment. Such activities we call as DAM, Digital Assets Management. We have a slide on that. In digital assets management, what we do is similar to what we do in the print world. We collect, collate and disseminate the information. And then apart from doing this asset management, we also have a new dimension now, that is DRM. In DRM, what we do is we also manage the rights, digital rights management. Then if there is a fundamental question here, when you talk about digital rights management, whose rights are you managing? Are we managing the rights of the users? Basically, libraries are always user centric. We always try to protect, our work for the benefit of the users, for centuries. But now in the digital environment, the situation is slightly different. We also try to manage the rights of the content creators. For example, authors have a lot of rights, and copyright is not unfamiliar to our students, and since the origin of book, copyright laws have been there, and libraries have been protecting the copyright of the creators and the service providers. Similar kind of a situation exists with electronic content. So, here we try to manage the rights of the content creators, that is the authors, so that they get a fair deal for the content that they have created and for fair deal for the energy they have spent invested in creating that content. and also we have a new dimension of protecting the rights of the service providers or the publishers, because unlike the print world, here the scenario is slightly tricky. In case of print world, suppose you buy a book for a library. When you buy a book, practically the library or the institution owns that. We have a kind of ownership situation in case of print world. For 75 years, we happily own that. As long as paper lasts, we have no problems with the ownership as such. But in case of digital content, situation is slightly different. Many a time we may not be owning the content, we may be only paying for accessing it. So the dimension is slightly different when you move from ownership to access. So then when it is access, then the question of access management arises. So that's why we have these there's a set of rules for these access management, and then as librarians we need to make these set of rules known to our users, and we also have a moral responsibility to ensure that these rules are strictly enforced in the organizations wherever we are employed. And in DRM, a kind of intellectual property management also is built in, apart from the rights of the service providers. Now, the scenario has actually changed from holding the collections to pointing to the collections. That's what a librarian does now. Instead of holding a print collection, we provide access to the digital collection, and we create pointers to those electronic collections by creating a suitable metadata, and we try to the best possible extent to protect the interests of our users, at the same time not infringing the copyright or not infringing the MOUs that we have signed with the service providers.
Thank you, Mr. Divakar. Basically, the DRM includes protecting the content as well as the interests of the creators, as well as the providing better services to the users. So, Dr. Venkateshan, sir, can you please explain why exactly DRM is required and what are the benefits of DRM for the libraries?
Yeah, as we talked, the internet and the computer technology easily enables anyone to copy or to distribute the digital content, including digital images, at very easy. Few click strokes on your mouse can copy, paste, or start a download. The primary purpose with the DRM was created is to control the access and its use and its distribution. Thereby, it protects the interests of the copyright holder in an online kind of world. The technology is designed to produce a more predictable and a very secure environment for the transmission of copyrighted material. One simple example could be your phone bill which comes through, or your bank statement which comes through email. You alone can open that, because you get a password on your mobile phone or something, you use that password to open the document. So, this is probably one of the day-to-day examples I would say of DRM. So, when did DRM come? When digital materials started appearing, when digital materials started getting copied and pasted, people who created this material wanted to safeguard their own copyrights, so they brought in the digital DRM technologies. DRM technologies are kind of technologies which enable the creator to have a control on who can access. It restricted users who can access. Sometimes even it can tell how many times you can use the same resources. For one example, we have some e-books which you purchase, and it says if you purchase one e-book within 1 year, you can use it 365 times, or it could be 365 users who could use it probably on the same day, then you lose license to the book anymore. So, they can control that, and also it is not possible to retransmit. So, they have a control. It is not that I get a book, I can transmit it to my friend. It cannot be done, because that is controlled by the DRM. It supports association of the content and various applications. Primarily, it looks at anti-piracy. You cannot pirate the work, because there are controls put in position there. And there are different ways DRM works, something called active DRM, where e-book is locked to a specific device. Amazon started these books in the Kindle format, and Amazon's Kindle books can be read only in the Kindle device or in a Kindle application in other devices which came up later.
Sir, actually this is sorry to interrupt you, sir. Sir, actually I would like to show my students the Kindle device. This is the which I am holding is a Kindle device. We have a variety of devices, like this is the Kindle, this is the iPad,
and you can also read the book on a mobile. This is the same Kindle book which is on a Kindle application which is sitting there on this mobile. If you can zoom it onto this, and you can see that that's a book by Tesla which is available in this device. And digital, I was telling about the active DRM which is there on specific to device. There is a passive DRM which is like watermarking a digital file, or there is a username and ID which is given, password which is given. These are all kind of passive methods. What happened is, during the end of the century, 1998, the Digital Millennium Copyright Act came into its existence in United States of America, which more or less defines what can be done or cannot be done in the digital world. It says if you try to circumvent whatever DRM measure which has been put, it's an offense, it's a civil offense. But if you do it for a commercial purpose, it becomes a criminal offense. That means I remove the DRM control in a given document and distribute this content to someone. It could be a piece of music, it could be a movie, or it could be a book. Then you are violating a law. And there are methods which are, it's not impossible to crack DRM. There are methods which can be used for cracking DRM, but if you do that, you are violating a law. So that's where the DCMA, the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, make it very clear, any attempt to circumvent this DRM measures is punishable by law. Though it is not very effective in doing that, because today there are people who use it, but they are doing something which is not strictly legal.
Sir, somewhere I have read, while browsing through the net, I have read an article wherein it is mentioned that the Sony Corporation, it has filed a case against a user for recording the video that was broadcast on the TV. Actually, that case was dismissed on the grounds that the user intended to use it at a time shift, not to access to violate the DRM. So that case was also dismissed. So that's how there are the fair use also has to be looked into. Exactly. This aspect.
And generally fair use is in the hands of the end user. If I am a reader, if I want to use portions of the book for later reading, like you said, time shifting, I could reasonable extent of the book, let's say about one chapter of the book, I can copy, photocopy, I can take it with me for reading later. It is completely legitimate, but I cannot make 10% copies, hundreds of copies, and distribute it and charge money for them. Then it becomes a commercial activity which takes away the income resource for the person who holds the copyright. So there it becomes a crime. That's why Sony, if I am using it for my own recording for me to see later, it is completely legitimate. But if I make a recording, upload it on a website, that's a criminal activity, because I am distributing either for money or not, I am distributing a content which I don't own. So that's where the criminality comes in.
Okay, so the legitimate use is always permitted. And sir, Dr. Divakar, can you please explain what are some basically commonly used DRM techniques in our day-to-day life, as well as the techniques that we used to use them in for preventing the accessing the content, digital content?
Yeah, thank you. It depends on the business model that a library is subscribing to. For example, in a given situation, the library may be owning the digital content, like you may buy, say, Encyclopedia Britannica in a CD and then put it on your CD server, make it available to your users. That is one kind of a situation where you, just like a print book, you physically keep the digital content in the library premises or in the institute premises, put it on your own server. There is another scenario where the content doesn't sit on doesn't physically sit on our server. It actually sits on the server of the content provider or the service provider or the publisher. These days there is more tendency towards the second model. We don't really keep the content with us, we rather access it from the server of the service provider.
I think one of the important point why this is happening, why the publishers want to take away the content from user side to them, is to control the access.
True.
He gave an example of an Encyclopedia Britannica on a CD. It was meant to be used by one user at a time, like a physical encyclopedia. But if you mount it on a server, it's possible for multiple users to access the same content. So that in terms of publishers' point of view, it becomes a violation of what he signed you with. So that's why I think they are slowly moving away, taking the control away from you, so that they can enforce the copyright content.
Yeah, in this situation, in the second situation where the content is mainly controlled or hosted by the service provider rather than the library, we have two kinds of technologies that we use. Simple one is user ID password. We are not, our users, our students are not unfamiliar to these things, and libraries have been using these access control mechanisms from time immemorial. Like people while entering the library, at the gate itself there is some kind of a security check to allow a person to get inside, and then once a person gets inside, there is again a kind of security check on whether a book or a device or a resource is issuable to a given person, and if it is issuable, for how many days. So we put in all these rights built into the circulation system, even in the print world. Now coming back to the electronic world, we do it like this. We do it in two ways. One is the user ID password mechanism, but more often now we have done away with the user ID password. In many circumstances, the content opens using the what we call IP authentication. So every library or every organization has got what we call a proxy server, and proxy server has got a numerical identity, and this number generally we pass it on to the service provider or the publisher at the time of subscribing the resource. So once we register our IP address with the service provider, any user going through this IP address will have a seamless access to that content. So this is basically employed by the IP address management is basically done by a library person, sometimes with the help of an IT group person. So these are the basic two models, like the user ID password and the IP based access. And we anyway have internally, you may have some additional controls, like to get into your institutional network, there may be an additional user ID password may be there. Sometimes if you are using your mobile device, now a lot of content is available on mobile devices. So there may be some protocol, like one time you have to register your mobile device or your laptop with the institutional network, and your MAC address may have to be registered there, so that you will also have seamless access not only from the desktop machines in the library or in the institution, but also from the devices that you physically carry with you, like the Kindle device or the iPad or the smartphone. Now content can be given to the users even on these personal devices. So DRM is incorporated even into the personal devices that people hold while coming to an institute or while going to a library.
Thank you, Dr. Divakar. Sir, can you, Dr. Venkateshan, can you please elaborate on the techniques like encryption, watermarking? How do these control the access?
Yeah, just I would like to continue from where Divakar mentioned about somebody coming into library, and that's probably one of the earliest instances of DRM in libraries, to allow person or not, give access to the content or not, even if it is a print content. But going by that, we have a clear equivalent analogy in the today digital world. Today, one of the students in my institution can easily borrow a book, a digital book. He goes to the portal, he clicks on that, and the book can get downloaded to his desktop. Then in case he wants to carry it on his mobile, he can still do that. He goes to his library portion, downloads it onto his device. That's all fine. The book is given to him for a 14 days reading time. At the 15th day, the book automatically returns to library. So he doesn't have to come to library. So the DRM ensures that you have access only for 14 days. 15th day, the book returns to library. That's one way it is done. But normally the encryption, which forms the backbone of all the DRM technology, is a kind of cryptography. In past also people have used it for protecting any information. You can password protect. That's the simplest form of thing. So when you password protect something, even when you are using it, transforming it, transmitting it, people can capture it, but they will not be able to actually read the content, because the content would require, like the example I gave about your bank statement, it requires a password to go in so that it can be decrypted. The encrypted one can be decrypted using the password, and then it can be read. But this could be up to much greater complexity. There are things called two-part keywords, RSA algorithm. There are much more which are very, very difficult to crack. A simple password like people mostly use as pass123 will be automatically tried by anyone who are trying to hack the document. So, you can make the password more complex. So, there are different ways in which the passwords can be made complex. So, the recipient may decrypt it and use it with the same key, then he gets automatically it opens it. And this is done normally for most of the PDF document which are prevented this way. But encryption also can control many other features. When you have an encryption done, I could say you could read it, but you cannot copy it. You could read it, you cannot print it. Or I could say, okay, you can print it, you can print 10 pages. So, all these controls are now with the publisher or with the content owner. He could decide how legally I will permit so much to be done. It works by not only text, as I said, PDF and so on. It works also on audio, it works on video or any other file. It's the same method. One another technique that is used is called watermarking. Like you have watermark in paper, which says something about this content is appearing from this source, the same thing is digitally done. So, when somebody wants to use it and the watermark runs through, and that shows the owner of the content. So, let us say there is a watermark of that article I have downloaded. If I am trying to distribute it, people can find out who distributed this content, because my watermark is there in that. It says Venkatesan has downloaded this content on such and such date from this IP address. So, you would know the culprit who had done the distribution, and this can be done to much greater and deeper level, something called steganography, which is at a much deeper level, but these are done to much more sensitive documents like bank documents and all other legal papers. They use the steganography.
Thank you, sir. Now, taking forward the discussion, so let us see some of the implications of DRM for the librarians. Dr. Divakar, there are opponents of the DRM as well as the proponents who support the DRM. So, as a librarian, do you support the DRM or do you oppose the DRM?
Basically, I uphold the rights of content creators like the authors. At the same time, as a professional, I would like to uphold the rights of the users, my users. Sometimes I believe that DRM, is it really rights management or is it restriction management? DRM, you know, that R, though originally the founders made it digital rights management, but actually it turns out to be digital restrictions management. So, what is the restriction that we are doing? The users cannot freely copy, download whatever they want. So, all these restrictions are targeted towards the end user. So, that kind of philosophy basically I oppose as a library professional, and because we are getting into the, sometimes we even get into the privacy of the users. So, we believe that just as water, air, information also should be made available, ideally in a free environment without any restrictions. When we buy a book, for example, in the print world, I can use it for 75 years without any kind of a restriction. I can give it, I can issue it any number of times, I can copy it under the fair use clause, and person can take it to his home, keep it with him, and then make use of that. I can even withdraw a book, I can resell the book. I can all these facilities were possible in the print world. So, suddenly when we have entered the digital world, many of those rights that our users have, sometimes I feel have been taken away from the users. So, that is probably detrimental to the scholarly communication, especially in science and technology. Many a time we believe that we always stand on the shoulders of our predecessors. So, so somebody has done some work and today somebody is extending that work. So, if you agree on that principle, even today's work, which was based on somebody else's previous work, should be made available, you know, not with so much paraphernalia for digital rights management and things like that, you know, and this has serious implications for, especially for users in the developing countries or in the poor countries, you know, who cannot pay the subscription cost. For example, we have seen the open access movement, you know, that has come up approximately 10 years back, as an opposition to the DRM. DRM is, as you know, is approximately 15 years old, and simultaneously, you know, since people started following the DRM, implementing the DRM, you know, the rights activists or the opponents of DRM came out with the open access movement. They believe that content should be made available free of cost, because after all, you know, the scholarly in the entertainment industry situation may be different. I am not talking about the entertainment industry, what happens there. Maybe DRM is strictly required in the entertainment industry, but situation is slightly different in a library situation, where libraries do not work for profit.
Yeah. Libraries traditionally they have been service oriented organizations, and also the librarians, they work with the mode to provide the right kind of information to the right user at the right time. So, in this situation, sir, Dr. Venkateshan, how do you say that DRM actually can be used to provide effective services to the users?
Yeah. And I would agree with Diwakar in few aspects. DRM, if it is not carefully done, it limits the ability of the libraries to do many things which they used to do in the print world. Because one of the primary rights a buyer has is a first sale right. So, I buy a book, after reading the book, I have all the rights according to at least the US copyright laws to sell the book or to give a book to a friend for him to read. Whereas, I cannot do that in a digital book which I buy. With DRM control, I cannot give it away, and there are numerous restrictions which come in terms of time, and the normal fair use cannot be used in all DRM control. Maybe some allow you, and also there are libraries are known to preserve the material what they have, archiving and preserving. So, today I cannot archive or preserve any of the DRM control material. Still it lies with the publisher. So, he has to take care of that. I have to trust he will take care of that. We may lose some books which are under DRM control. That company goes out of business, probably the entire collection might be lost, because he holds the key to the content. And one of the very important things which many DRM opponents are crying out very strongly is for people with disabilities. In the past, if you have a PDF document, let us say even a digital document, you can read it in the computer because there is a read aloud program. I can take it, click on that, so the computer itself read it out for a visually challenged person. So, that facility is completely taken away. Most of the DRM control devices cannot speech synthesize, it cannot enable the voice over. So, that is one major disadvantage for people with disabilities. But now many of the libraries are overcoming this, because the libraries today are empowered, at least in United States and Canada, by law, that they can take a audio version of the book. They can create out of even a DRM control book by one librarian sitting there and reading out on a device. So, there are ways to overcome some of the limitations which are there in the DRM. But libraries have been primarily opposing specific ebook formats, because if I buy a book, it says you can buy only in Kindle. But initial kind of this restriction which came has been overcome over the period of time by now even on a small mobile phone, on any other device, I can have, let us say, a Kindle kind of application which runs, through which you can read the book. So, this has made possible some of those objections go away. It is also possible to find out who is reading that book. If I download, if I go register myself, download the book and read, publisher has the information. It could be impinging on my privacy. I do not want somebody else to know whether I am reading that book. This came in a large way, because libraries do not divulge the information about which reader is reading what book. So, this goes against our tenets. So, they need new technology to probably prevent this kind of intrusion into privacy even on the DRM controlled devices. So, there are methods. So, we become as one user, let us say an organization could be CCMB. So, the publisher will know only there are one user from CCMB as user book or 10 users of user book, he will not know which user. So, we can stay behind a proxy wall. So, there are methods in which some of these concerns also can be addressed. But in all this we need to see the proponents of DRM are not evil people. They are also business people. They want their commercial interest to be kept alive. They spend money in producing the book and also they pay royalty to the author. They want to protect all that. So, illegal way of transmitting this content is what they want to protect. But in that process, they also end up restricting some of the libraries even for the fair use.
We have a phone call here, sir. Hello. Hello.
Hello.
May I know who is speaking?
Madam, I am Bharati from Ramnagar speaking, madam.
Yes, yes, Ms. Bharti, please tell me what is your question?
Madam, I am listening to this digital rights management program.
Okay.
I want to know what are the access restrictions or the terms and conditions for the websites, madam.
Okay.
Suppose if I am having a library portal website, can I link any website to it or any digital rights issues are involved into it? I just want to have a clarity about it, madam.
Okay, okay, Bharati, I will pass on this question to our expert, Dr.
Absolutely.
Divakar.
Bharati, absolutely no problem. Linking your library website to a service provider's website is no problem, no issue at all. You can even do linking from your OPAC to the directly to the document level. Document level interlinking is also possible and permissible. You are not violating any DRM in linking the content. You know, that's perfectly fine. But what? But
I
what?
want to
the,
know that others websites I want to use in my portal. Do you have any issue in that?
Yeah, that is copyright issue. That is copyright issue.
That's what I am asking. So suppose some tutorials of any content or some information, if I want to use it in my portal.
Any content which is appearing on internet are all copyrighted, whether they are explicitly stated or not, they are all copyrighted. You could direct people to that content directly, but you cannot copy and paste that content in your own website. You are liable for any prosecution in case the owner of that content tracks your website it is using. In the first instance, they may just send you a mail saying that please take out the content, this content belong to me, you have no right to use them, and beyond that they could take other legal recourse. So, please do not use the content as it is. You can have a summary, you can have a derivative work done out of that. They are all within the fair use. If someone has let us say they have written an article about DRM, you also want to say something about that, you can use that article as a source and you can give a citation to that source. You can write your own independent article and put it on your website giving a citation to the source. Then it is perfectly legal. And just because it is freely available in the internet does not mean it is free to copy. That must be the message you should remember.
Thank you, Ms. Bharti, for calling, and I hope your question is clarified, your doubt is clarified. And to come back to the discussion, sir, to continue the discussion, traditionally the librarians, they used to provide interlibrary loan service to satisfy the requirements of our users. So, is it possible in the DRM environment also, Dr. Divakar?
It is very tricky, Saroja, providing interlibrary loan in the digital environment. It has some implications. For example, imagine a situation where I am subscribing to a electronic journal, and my fellow librarian, say Venkatesan, calls me over phone and says, Divakar, I need a copy of this article, can you share PDF with me? Perhaps I feel it is fair use because I am not giving it directly to another end user, I am giving it to another fellow library professional. And then Venkatesan in his organization, he ensures for me that it is put to right kind of use. He knows what for the user has asked for that, it is a legitimate request, and then once he is convinced that it is a legitimate request, he passes on the request to me. And then I download that PDF and then maybe send it to him as an email attachment. We do that, but strictly speaking, again I use the word, underline the word strictly speaking, sharing a PDF of from a subscribed resource to another library has some problems, has some violations. If you read the fine print in the agreement, in the license agreements that we sign, many of the license agreements do not provide scope for that. So, what they say is, under fair use clause, I can take a printout of that PDF, take a printout and post it to Venkatesan, and Venkatesan can pass it on to his user. That is perfectly fine. Taking a printout from a digital resource, sharing a printout is considered to be fair. So, that is why in some of our institutions, like let us say even in the National Science Library that we have in Delhi. So, what we do is, we do permit walk-in users into the library, and walk-in users can access the digital content that is available just like the institutional users, but only difference is they cannot put a pen drive into the USB port and copy the digital content, copy the original digital content into the pen drive and then carry it out from the organization. What we are permitting is, people can read that online on the screen. If they like that, we will provide a paper copy of that. So, in that way we are satisfying the DRM in one side, and the other side we are also trying to and fulfill our professional ethics and ethic of maintaining an interlibrary situation. But strictly speaking, when the question of loaning a book, physical loaning of a book is concerned.
Sorry to interrupt you, sir. Again, we have another phone call here incoming. Hello.
Hello. Good afternoon, ma'am.
Good afternoon.
I'm a school librarian.
Okay. Can you repeat your name, please?
Mrs. Lakshmi.
Oh, Mrs. Lakshmi. Please pose your question.
Ma'am, actually, can we purchase these digital books and distribute to our students? And can we put them in our school website? They can access through their user ID and password.
Yeah, what perhaps Lakshmi means is, suppose she is a school librarian. Suppose there is a story book. She has purchased a story book for her children. So, can she issue a story book, to a number of students? Can she distribute it, give away the story book to the school children?
Because we have multiple users.
Yeah, if you purchase, Lakshmi, I am Venkatesan. If you have purchased the book out of a publisher's website, so the book is still available in the publisher's website. If it allows multi-user, sure, you can give the password to your students. They can go to this website and their passwords are legitimate. So, they, as many number of them as it is allowed by the book contract, can use the book. They can, multiple users can. So, you can share the password with your students and they can use it. But if it is a single user version, then you need to have the access happening at library or at one place at a time.
Then is there any process to manage these books in our school libraries?
And then more people are going away from that model where you can host it locally, and that's becoming less and less possible because of the misuse which has been happening in the past. So, people think still will have to go to the publisher site from where you can read the book or download the book.
Thank you, Mrs. Lakshmi. And sir, we have one more question ready here. Hello.
Hello, ma'am.
Please introduce yourself.
Ma'am, my name is Prajakta and I am speaking from Nagpur.
Okay. Prajakta.
Ma'am, I want to ask that are some MAC function and hash functions are used in the digital library?
Hash functions are used in digital libraries. That is the question,
yes,
sir.
MAC and hash functions.
See, but many of these things will be outside the purview of the DRM we are talking about, and some of these are also used to crack, and so I think we are not strictly talking about very legitimate things. You could use this to crack digital rights, and that's why I am not answering your question.
No, it is unethical. Perhaps it is not ethical to do that, and at least libraries do not encourage that. That is against.
Yeah, I can just quote one example. A professor in US, before going to a conference, he told about a new computer program he has written which can crack digital rights management, and because of that he got into serious problem. Before he landed in Germany, there was an arrest warrant waiting for him, so he cancelled his trip, because it's some serious offense that can happen. Not so much actually, I would say, for books and articles. Publishers of books and articles are not so strong and severe, but music producers, movie producers are very, very critical about this, because there is a lot of revenue that loss happens in their case. So, they take very, very strong measures to combat this kind of what they call as piracy.
Yeah, as sir said, there are several techniques like hashing, and then there are watermarking, encryption, private keys, public keys, so on and so forth. There are many techniques, but we have to use only those techniques which are not I mean harmful to the creators, as well as we have to strike a balance between the users, consumers, as well as the content creators. So, thank you for calling, Ms. Prajakta. Thank you very much. Then to coming back to the discussion, so we were discussing the limitations as well as the how best we can utilize these technologies to offer services in the libraries. And then sir, there is this copyright law which says which gives the rights to the content creators for distribution and then sale of the documents and have on their property. So, is there any legal framework for DRM?
Actually, the legal context of the DRM is a copyright law. United States copyright laws and the European Union and many countries have a DRM system, which has been derived from the World Intellectual Property Rights Organization copyright treaty, which happened in 1996. So, the law gives a copyright owner the right to prohibit others from making some other work, such as copying, downloading, distributing, making even derivative works, whereas the DRM is highly inflexible to end user to make even fair use easy. Free use of copyright material is called fair dealing, fair use in various countries under different names, but this becomes difficult under DRM, though copyright law allows the fair use. So, that is where I think there is a, I would call it a shortcoming of the technology. And DRM may prevent users from using a copyrighted material for fair use, as I said, and library users of a physical book can make a judgment how much can be used. Like he said, if someone asks for a copy of an article, it can be sent to him in a physical form. If the same user has an electronic edition of the same title, the publisher may use DRM to prevent him from sending. Even if I send a copy of the thing to him, they may not be able to read it, because the DRM prevents anybody else to read it. Maybe it is controlled by the IP access, IP address from which the request is coming from, or many other things, many other way. So, there is a combination of this digital millennium copyright and DRM, which can make a crime out of even a legal information case. That is where the.
In India, is there any such legal provision for this?
No, the Indian Parliament passed an act in the year 2010 called Information Technology Act, which is more or less a replica of the American Digital Rights Management Act. So, the DRM is very much in place in India, but most of it, as Venkatesan has said, it is implemented by the music industry, by the entertainment industry, rather than the publishing industry. So, in case of libraries, there are not many cases of violation of DRM, at least to my knowledge, in India, though there have been some cases of the video piracy and music piracy cases. And as he has said, even under the Indian Act, which was passed by the Parliament in the year 2010, it is a criminal offence. If somebody gets into the commercial aspects of that, in video piracy, somebody selling the video disc for profit making, so then it is punishable under the it is treated as a criminal act.
Okay.
I can tell many institutions, including academic institutions, get legal notice very often from publishers of movies, saying that someone from your institution has been distributing my movie violating my copyright.
Okay.
What happens is, this person downloads the thing, and same P2P network sometimes gets used for distributing the content to others, and this is a clear violation of copyright, and each institution is supposed to take action against this by preventing, finding out who is the culprit, and so on. So, this becomes an additional job. But luckily for all of us, at least in the libraries, I would say DRM is slowly going away, and I myself have seen there are publishers who used to have DRM on their books and the content, they are taking it away. because now they have greater confidence in libraries that they are not going to misuse the freedom that is given to them. And this is a way forward, and also the open access movement and many things are forcing, I would say, publishers to open up their content for all legitimate use and fair use. So, this is what is going to happen as we go forward. Probably at some point of time, DRM will go away from at least written text, published books and scholarly articles. So, it will free us up, and the entertainment industry may continue using DRM measures to control large revenue generating content which they want to prevent, but at least hopefully the future looks to be brighter for publishing and libraries.
So, thank you, Dr. Venkateshan. Dr. Divakar, just Dr. Venkateshan has mentioned about the open source material, open access materials. So, how do the librarians are increasingly they are involved into building institutional repositories for their institutions, and then a lot of content that is produced by the institution is open to the others through the institutional repositories. Does DRM have any implications on institutional repositories?
Thank you, Saroja. The institutional repositories have come up actually to oppose DRM. DRM actually opposes, prevents users from reading content which is behind a paywall or a subscription wall. So, to overcome that, so what the others thought was that why not I make available my content on my personal website or my institutional server, so that others will get free access to that. After all, it is me who has created the content. So, I have a right as an author, I feel I have a right as a publishing author in a scientific organization. I believe that I have a right to disseminate my research to whomsoever I want, though for sake of formality I might have signed a copyright to transfer agreement to a given journal, but ethically speaking, especially in government funded research, since it is done using the taxpayers' money, there is a feeling that since we are using taxpayers' money for doing research, the fruits of research should get back to the general public. Public have a right to read the material that is generated out of the money spent by the taxes. So, that is the scene behind that is the background of creation of the institutional repositories. Yes, in institutional repositories there are copyright problems. So, we make sure that we do not violate any rights of the publishers when we put content into the institutional repositories. There is something called the final version of the author's manuscript. Before the author submits his manuscript, so that version, most of the publishers allow that to be loaded into the institutional repository. The content is same, only thing is the figures may not appear at the right place. First it may have text separately, and then the figure may be at the end, and then it may not have proper page formatting. No, but for reading purposes, at least in people who cannot afford the subscription of that particular resource, this is fair enough. You make the content available to the users to the institutional repository. So, institutional repositories are a kind of what we call green open access phenomena. Ideally open access proponents support the gold open access, that is the content should be made available in its original form without any restriction as such. So, that is what we call gold open access, but then institutional repositories come under green open access, another modified, a derivative of the original content.
Even there, sorry for interjecting, even there I have seen, I used to be with Indian Institute of Science, where we had India's largest institutional repository with a very large amount of content. But some of the authors, creators, scientists who want the work to be known only within the institutions, or probably after a period of 6 months they say, okay, then you can make my content allowable to be viewed from rest of the world.
Yes.
When there are such requirements coming, DRM can come and help. Even within the institutional repository, that document I could lock it up with a time frame. I could say from where it can be accessed or after what time it can be accessed. So, DRM could also be used there. It had been used actually.
Yes,
Venkateshan, apart from that, In some of these platforms, like especially if you are using ePrints platform for an institutional repository, apart from putting some kind of a time lock, we also have some kind of request a print button there. If you need not put the whole PDF in a public access mode, you have create a button wherein if somebody needs an article, he presses a button, it automatically generates an email to the author.
Correct.
And then author gives it. So then it comes under the fair use class. So even through the institutional repository, we do document delivery service satisfying the fair use clause of the copyright.
Okay. Does Creative Commons come in the way for open access material? So how it?
No, Creative Commons actually supports the gold open access. Actually, Creative Commons people they are proponents of gold open access. In gold open access, from the day the content is created, it should be made available to the readers without any kind of restrictions. So that is the philosophy in gold open access. In green open access, some restrictions are there, like pressing a button for getting a photocopy from the author, or giving some, as Venkatesan has said, giving some 3 months or 6 months embargo period, before the content actually becomes available publicly. So and then sometimes we also can give through the institutional repository a link to the publisher site. Many a time we give also a hot link to the publisher site. So that will provide an additional access point for the content that your authors have created.
In fact, Creative Commons license goes much beyond just use of that content, downloading and using it. It allows you to create even derivative work. Okay. You can take a video, take portions of the video, modify, make a criticism. Anything you want to do, it is allowed under Creative Commons license. So that's what the beauty about that.
So thank you, Dr. Venkatesan and Dr. Divakar. So let us quickly, because time is running out, let us quickly examine some more concerns like educating the librarians as well as the users about the DRM is very important. Can you throw some light on that?
Yeah, many a time in the institutions, what happens is, especially in the academic environment, students do not know that they are violating the DRM. Unintentionally, there will be instances of violations. So we have a role to educate our people, like creating some kind of web pages, where we tell the users, I agree to this, and all. Some libraries do that. You press a button there, you click the box, I agree to all this, so that the users also become responsible. But many a time, some of these violations takes place unintentionally, at least in the academic environment. So user education is extremely important.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you, Dr. Divakar. Thank you, Dr. Venkatesan Garu, for coming to the studios and elaborating on this topic, discussing this topic in detail. Actually, from the beginning, we have seen what is DRM. These are the technologies that control the access to the digital content and to protect the rights of the creators and also to serve the consumers in a better way. And as Professor Venkatesan has said, many of the publishers, they are slowly taking away from the DRM technologies as far as libraries are concerned, though they are still prevalent in the entertainment industry. So hopefully the librarian is there to promote the use of the content. If content is not used to the fullest extent, the research also may take a back seat. So with this, the librarian should strike a balance between the safeguarding the rights of the creators and the customers. Thank you.